They say the sharpest moments in life don't arrive with fanfare. They arrive with silence. On a gray morning, the honor guard formed a perfect line, rifles gleaming, boots squared to the curb. The town held its breath. A flag waited to be folded for a man they'd lost, a mentor, a neighbor, a quiet hero. Then it happened. A hitch in the rhythm. One guard's eyes locked on an elderly man in a worn blazer at the back of the crowd. The pin on his lapel matched the emblem on their sleeves. Every line, every angle, every star. The formation hesitated for a beat, the kind of pause you only notice when discipline breaks itself. And in that heartbeat of recognition, they understood. The man they were about to honor had not only trained the ones who trained them. He had designed the very emblem they wore to stand brave for the rest of us. If you stay with me to the end, you'll learn how a sketch on a diner napkin became a promise stitched to generations, and why those soldiers broke formation for just 1 second to salute the designer before the ceremony even began. His name was Martin Cole, though most folks called him Marty with the notebook. He'd carried a pocket sketchbook since 1968, the year he came home and found that the easiest way to breathe was to draw. He wasn't a speechmaker. He didn't fill rooms with stories. He filled margins with lines, precise ones, emblems, insignias, patches, tiny maps of meaning that turned service into a shared language. The emblem that changed everything started as a favor. A new honor guard unit in the county needed something that felt like duty without looking like a billboard. The first draft was all wings and thunder. Marty laughed and started over. He took 3 core ideas, steadfast, witness, return, and built a geometry you could feel more than explain. The shield sat a hair narrower than tradition. The laurel curved like fingertips supporting a folded flag. And at the center, a small star was not a shout, but a pulse. People credited the unit's polish to training. Marty knew better. Symbols train back. When you wear a promise over your heart, your spine learns it. Decades rolled. Marty taught shop at the high school, sharpened kids' eye for detail, and fixed hinges for anyone who asked. He never billed for veterans, and he never kept a copy of the emblem he'd gifted the county. He said an oath should live where it works, not on the wall of the guy who drew it. Then came the morning we're talking about, the ceremony for Chief Raymond Hale, a steady hand in storms and the kind of leader whose name made everyone stand an inch taller. The square downtown smelled like rain on stone. Families pressed close. The honor guard stepped out, measured, exact, wearing that emblem like a steady heartbeat. Marty took his place quietly near the last row, tugging a blazer that fit a little looser than last year. He didn't expect anything. Designers rarely do. The work isn't about being seen, but the work had seen him for years. And as the cadence began, a sergeant glanced up, then down, then froze, because sometimes the past doesn't knock, it simply takes its seat. When the rifles lifted, time did too. One breath, one pause, one memory. And the emblem told the truth that uniforms can't always say out loud. Someone had to draw the promise before anyone could wear it. They said the ceremony would start at 10, but the square began filling before 9. You could hear it in the way footsteps softened near the curb, in the hush that always arrives when uniforms and families share the same patch of mourning. Vendors slid their carts back a block. The florist on the corner tied blue ribbon to white lilies without looking up. By the gazebo, a teenager adjusted a tripod and whispered into her phone, promising her audience she'd stay quiet, that this wasn't content so much as witness. The flag on the pole caught the faintest breeze and practiced folding itself in the air. Marty Cole parked 2 streets over because habit said important moments deserve a short walk. He kept one hand in his blazer pocket, feeling the rounded corner of a well-worn sketchbook like a lucky coin. The book was mostly blank these days, not because he'd run out of lines, but because he'd learned to draw without paper. Measure twice, breathe once, etch the world in memory first. He paused under the sycamores that framed the courthouse and counted beats like a metronome, the cadence of shoes, the soft clink of metals, the steady somewhere of a snare drum warming up. Across the square, Sergeant Ella Navarro reviewed the formation the way a carpenter checks a door, not with doubt, but with respect for gravity. She moved past each guard, fingers hovering near sleeves, eyes skimming boots, chin angles, spacing. "Keep your breath on the count," she said, quiet and even. "The town will hear your silence louder than any mistake." The younger ones nodded like students before a recital. Ella touched the stitch at her own shoulder, two threads crossing at the base of the emblem's star, and felt the familiar calm that came from wearing a promise made of geometry and care. The emblem itself looked simple from a distance. A shield trimmed by laurel, a single star centered not dead on but living, a fraction low, like a heartbeat you could feel through cloth. Up close, it told a longer story. The laurel's curve echoed the shape of a folded flag. The shield's taper drew the eye home. The star's slight descent suggested humility, a light that chose service over spectacle. Most people never read that much into it. They didn't need to. That was the point of good design. It worked whether or not you had the words. Marty took a place near the back row, halfway behind a stone pillar, where he could see the line without becoming part of it. He recognized faces the way a map recognizes rivers. The Hales stood together, wife, daughter, two sons, holding the kind of steady you hold for someone who carried steadiness for you. He'd sketched with Chief Hale once, years ago, on a scrap of cardboard while waiting out a storm at Station 2. The chief had drawn a crooked house that refused to fall down. Marty had drawn a hand holding it up from inside. At 9:58, the snare spoke. Not loudly, not yet, but like a throat clearing for the truth. The guard stepped forward as one, rifles aligned, steps finding a groove that felt older than the sidewalk. The sound gathered the crowd into a single breath. Even the pigeon seemed to understand. The teenage videographer pressed her lips together and let the phone's lens blink for her. Ella's eyes moved like a conductor's metronome. Left, right, center, check. Everything held. Then Marty shifted, a small adjustment to give an older man a better view. The motion caught the light and the pin on his lapel, an early run of the emblem, hand enameled back when the county could afford time more easily than money, flashed once. Ella saw at first a glint with memory inside. Her count didn't break, but something in her expression did. Recognition, quick as a spark and twice as warm. She'd been told the story of the emblem, of the man who drew it and refused his name on any plaque. Stories carry edges you can cut yourself on when they turn out to be true in front of you. For a half beat, the square changed temperature. Not colder, sharper. Ella's left hand lifted a hair sooner than the right, an imperceptible hiccup that only those who lived by the count would feel. The line adjusted like a school of fish, perfect in the way nature is perfect even when it swerves. She let her eyes find Marty's for a fraction of a second that did not belong to protocol. The pin, the lines, the man. It all fit like a key turning. Marty didn't nod. He didn't wave. He did what designers do when their work finds its purpose in the wild. He stilled. He let the emblem speak for him from 1,000 threads stitched into 100 sleeves. The snare lifted its voice. The cadence called the steps, and the town leaned forward without moving. Whatever came next would be the ceremony they'd prepared for. But under the polish, under the drill, a quiet amendment had already been adopted. Before they honored one more legacy, they'd unknowingly acknowledged the hand that had shaped the way honor looked when worn. The ceremony began exactly on time because Chief Hale would have wanted it that way. The honor guard moved as one, measured, steady, deliberate, while the air seemed to thicken with meaning. Flags shifted in the faint wind, the rifles gleamed, and sunlight crawled down the courthouse wall like a slow clock. From the crowd, Marty could see the entire arc of the movement, how discipline looked when human hands held it. But he also saw something deeper, nerves disguised as precision. He'd spent years teaching students that no line is truly straight. It's a collection of tiny corrections pretending to be certainty. That's what the guards reminded him of, a living drawing, adjusting as it breathed. At the podium, Captain Reed stepped forward. His uniform was immaculate, the crease in his trousers so sharp it looked etched. He began speaking about legacy, how Chief Hale had led through storms and scarcity, how leadership is sometimes just the quiet refusal to quit. Marty listened, but his eyes kept drifting to the emblem on the podium banner. The one he'd drawn on a napkin over coffee half a lifetime ago. The one they now called the Sentinel Mark. Reed gestured toward the guard as he spoke. Each of these men and women wears a symbol that carries the chief's spirit forward, he said. It reminds us what service is, steadfast, vigilant, humble. He didn't know, couldn't know, that the man standing in the back row had shaped that symbol letter by letter, curve by curve, until it meant exactly that. Across the formation, Ella Navarro caught sight of Marty again. The flash of that lapel pin wasn't a trick of light. It was the same deep enamel blue that her grandmother used to call honor blue. It was the color that sat beneath every badge and patch they wore. She whispered, barely audible, "Sir, that's him." The corporal beside her didn't understand. "Who?" "The one who drew it," she said. "The emblem." Her voice was quiet, but it traveled, like good stories do. One by one, eyes flickered toward the man at the back. Nobody turned their head. They just knew. It's strange how a formation can remain perfect while something invisible shifts inside it, like a building settling on its foundation. The guards didn't miss a beat, but their hearts beat differently now. Marty, unaware, tugged his cuff and stared at the flag being folded. He thought about Hale, how the man had carried that emblem in his wallet for 20 years, a token from the first patch printing. "It's not about the shape," Hale had said once. "It's about what it reminds me to be when no one's watching." The rifle volley sounded, crisp, echoing between the buildings. Each report marked the rhythm of a life remembered. As the echo faded, Marty's knees stiffened slightly. The sound always made him feel like time was saluting back. He wasn't the kind of man who thought symbols mattered more than deeds. But in that moment, watching Hale's casket covered by a flag bearing his design, he realized something. Maybe good design was a kind of service too, the kind that stays behind to remind others how to stand tall when everything else sits down. The guards moved into the folding sequence. It was flawless, until the very end when Ella hesitated, just half a breath. Enough to be noticed by anyone trained to count. The crowd didn't see it, but Marty did. He caught her eyes, and in that brief connection, something passed between them. Acknowledgement, respect, maybe even gratitude. Then she finished the fold, perfect to the last corner. The captain took the flag, the band struck the final note, and the world exhaled. For everyone else, it was a ceremony ending. For Marty, it was a design coming full circle. After the ceremony, the crowd thinned the way tides retreat, slowly, respectfully, leaving behind only footprints and murmurs. Chairs clattered softly as volunteers stacked them. Children were told to be careful near the monument. The scent of rain lingered in the air, mixing with brass polish and cut grass. Marty waited until the last salute was given before he started walking. He never liked being the first to leave anything sacred. He reached the base of the memorial and stood for a moment reading the engraved names. The stone had a way of quieting everything around it. That's when he heard a voice behind him, steady, trained, but softened by something human. "Sir, excuse me." He turned. Sergeant Navarro stood a few feet away, her hat tucked under her arm, posture still formal but her eyes unsure. Two other guards lingered behind her, pretending to tidy equipment. She took a breath. "Are you Martin Cole?" He smiled, small and tired. "Haven't heard the full name in a while," he said. "But yes. Used to be anyway." She nodded, relief and awe tangled together. "Sir, the emblem." He cut her off gently. "Don't sir me. I just drew it. You all gave it meaning." Ella hesitated, glancing at her sleeve. "We were taught the man who designed it never wanted recognition, that he refused payment." "True," Marty said, looking down at the pin on his lapel. "I wasn't designing for money. I was trying to make sense of what I'd seen." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He tapped the sketchbook in his pocket. "Symbols are promises. That emblem, those lines, it's not decoration. It's geometry built from things that mattered once. The shield's slope came from a hill we held too long. The laurel curve came from a friend's hand when the world was shaking apart. The star? That came later, when I finally understood what courage looks like when no one's filming it. Ella looked at him like someone listening to a story they'd been part of all along without knowing. "You made it sound like art," she said softly. "It was survival," he replied. "Some of us fix engines, some of us pray, some of us draw until the noise makes sense again." The other guards stepped closer, forming a half circle, still disciplined, but looser now. One of them, barely 20, said, "My father served under Chief Hale. He used to say that patch kept him honest." Marty chuckled. "Then it worked better than I hoped." A silence settled in, comfortable, weighty. It wasn't the kind of quiet that follows duty. It was the kind that follows understanding. Ella broke it carefully. "Would you let us take a photo? Just one? For the unit archives." Marty hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps the story travel, sure." They gathered in front of the monument. No one gave commands this time. No attention, no ready. Just shoulders straightened instinctively. When the camera clicked, the reflection on the bronze caught the sunlight just right, casting the emblem's shape across Marty's chest like it had been waiting all these years to come home. Afterward, Ella thanked him and turned to leave, but he stopped her. "Sergeant," he said, "promise me something. When you teach the new ones about that emblem, don't make it about me. Make it about what it's supposed to remind you of. Steadiness, witness, return." She nodded firmly. Always. When she was gone, Marty stayed a little longer. The flag still rippled faintly on its pole. He ran his hand along the edge of the stone, feeling the grooves of names, old and new. For years he'd drawn meaning into symbols for others, but for the first time, standing there among them, he felt what those lines had given back, something quiet, enduring, and whole. He closed his sketchbook without writing a word. Some designs, he realized, are finished only when someone else wears them. When Marty returned home that afternoon, the quiet hit harder than usual. The front door creaked the same way it had for 40 years. But now the sound felt like an echo of something that didn't quite belong to him anymore. He set his blazer on the hook by the window and placed his sketchbook gently on the table. The sunlight fell across it, tracing the scratches in the leather. Every mark told a story, and every story had a weight. He made coffee the way he always did, one scoop too strong, 1 minute too long, and sat by the window facing the street. Across the road, a family was returning from the ceremony. The boy was still wearing his miniature honor guard cap, the kind handed out to kids who might one day grow into the real thing. Marty smiled faintly. Some designs, he thought, take generations to finish. On the table, the sketchbook tempted him open. He flipped through pages filled with ghosts of ideas, early versions of the emblem, half-drawn maps, a note that read simply, "Shape means memory." His hands, stiff from age and cold, traced the lines with a pencil that had long forgotten how to sharpen. Every curve seemed heavier now that he'd seen those young guards wearing his work like armor. He thought of Ella's eyes at the memorial, the recognition, the gratitude, and something inside him stirred that he hadn't felt in years. Relevance. The knock came soft but deliberate. He opened the door to find a man in a dark coat, Captain Reed, still in uniform, but with his hat tucked under one arm. "Mr. Cole," Reed began, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Marty said, waving him in. "You're the man who gave that speech today." "Yes, sir," Reed replied, looking slightly embarrassed. "I just came to say something I didn't get the chance to this morning. We all wear your work, and most of us didn't even know your name until today." "That seems wrong," Marty chuckled, shaking his head. "No, that's how it was supposed to be. I wanted the emblem to mean us, not me." Reed hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box, smooth, freshly polished. Inside was a folded strip of cloth with the emblem embroidered in gold thread, the kind reserved for ceremonial use only. "The unit voted this morning," Reed said. "We'd like to make you an honorary member of the Guard. The emblem belongs to everyone, but the first draft belongs to you." For once, Marty had no words. He stared at the patch, the same lines he'd drawn in a diner booth 50 years ago, now gleaming like they'd been waiting for this moment all along. "Captain," he said finally, "if I take this, it'll only be to remind me how small one man's part really is in something bigger." Reed nodded. "That's exactly why you deserve it." When the captain left, the house felt less empty. Marty set the patch beside his sketchbook, still open to the original page. The two designs looked almost identical, except for one small detail. The modern emblem had 3 fine stitches just below the star, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Reed hadn't mentioned them, but Marty noticed. They weren't there in his version. He smiled. Someone had added to the story. And that, he realized, was the whole point. Designs live only when they evolve. He poured another cup of coffee, sat back, and let the silence fill the room. Not as an absence, but as proof that his lines had found a voice long after his hand had stopped drawing. That night the rain came, not hard, but steady, like a drum roll played by memory. Marty stayed awake, the sound pressing softly against the windows. The emblem patch lay on the table beside his sketchbook, and every time lightning flashed, the gold thread caught it like it was alive. He poured himself another cup of coffee and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked in rhythm with the storm, the same rhythm that used to fill barracks long ago. The years hadn't erased the habits, counting the beats between thunderclaps, tracking the sound of water like coordinates on a map. It wasn't nostalgia, it was vigilance, disguised as routine. Then came the phone call. "Mr. Cole, this is Sergeant Navarro." Her voice carried that same firm tone, but now it wavered just slightly, the kind of tremor that comes when duty mixes with emotion. "Sorry to call so late. Something happened tonight." Marty straightened. "You all right, Sergeant?" "Yes, sir. It's just, we had a situation. A storm took down part of the memorial wall by the river, the one with the original emblem engraving. The county wants it repaired immediately, but they said the mold for the emblem was lost decades ago. We were hoping, well, I thought maybe you still had your sketches." Marty looked toward the table. The sketchbook was open, the ink faded but clear. "I've got something better than a mold," he said quietly. "I've got the memory that made it." He grabbed his coat and hat. By the time he reached the memorial site, the rain had eased into mist. Flashlights bobbed between puddles as guards and volunteers worked to cover the damaged section with tarps. The stone, slick and dark, looked like it was bleeding light. Ella approached, her uniform damp but her spirit unshaken. "I didn't know if you'd actually come." "You asked for the designer," he said with a grin. "I figured he should earn the title at least once." They stood side by side, examining the cracks. The emblem had fractured across the laurel curve, splitting the star right through its center. Marty traced the break with his fingertip. "Funny," he murmured. "Even stone can forget how to hold itself together." Ella watched him carefully. "Can it be fixed?" He nodded slowly. "Everything can, if you remember why it was made in the first place." She smiled faintly. "What was your reason?" Marty squinted through the mist. "To remind us that honor isn't about standing still, it's about standing again." By dawn, the rain had stopped, leaving only the smell of wet soil and steel. Marty had already sketched a new version of the emblem in the mud with a stick, explaining the lines as he drew them. "This part," he said, pointing to the laurel, "was always meant to bend, not break. Because service bends you, but it shouldn't end you." Ella knelt beside him, watching the rough design take shape. "It's strange," she said. "I used to think we wore this patch to look unified. Now I realize we wear it to remember we're human." Marty smiled. "That's the best design note anyone's ever given me." As the sun rose, a photographer from the local paper arrived and began taking pictures of the restoration work. One of the photos caught Marty and Ella standing over the half-repaired emblem, both of them looking down at the design as if it were something alive between them. That image would later hang in the station's hallway, framed beneath the quote Marty scribbled on the back of his sketch. Symbols don't last because they're perfect. They last because someone keeps believing in them after they crack. By the time the photograph appeared in the local paper, Marty's phone hadn't stopped ringing for days. Old friends, veterans, students from his shop class, people he hadn't heard from in decades, all wanted to talk. Not about medals or speeches, but about the emblem. About what it meant. He wasn't used to attention. He'd lived most of his life in the margins, content to be the man behind the mark. But something about that image, the old designer and the young sergeant repairing the symbol together, struck a chord far beyond the county line. Letters started arriving. A high school history teacher from Vermont wanted a copy of his original sketch to hang beside the Constitution poster. A retired officer from Georgia wrote that the emblem had helped him through his recovery after losing his leg. Even a college design student from Seattle sent a note saying she'd never understood how lines could carry emotion until she read his story. Marty kept them all in a shoebox on the counter. He never answered most of them, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to accept gratitude for something that had come from grief. One afternoon, Sergeant Navarro stopped by his house again. No cameras, no press, just coffee and conversation. "You know," she said, flipping through his sketchbook, "the guys at the station keep talking about you. One of them called you the architect of humility." Marty laughed. "Sounds like a contradiction in terms." "Maybe," she said. "But it fits. You gave pride a shape that doesn't brag." He leaned back, considering that. "Funny. I didn't design it to make people proud. I designed it so they wouldn't forget the cost of being." Ella nodded slowly. "That's exactly why it lasts." They sat in silence for a while, the ticking clock measuring every thought they didn't say. Outside, wind carried the smell of rain-soaked leaves. On the wall hung the honorary patch Captain Reed had given him, framed beside a faded photo of his younger self in uniform. "You ever regret it?" Ella asked finally. "Staying out of the spotlight all those years?" Marty smiled. "Not once. The best designs disappear into the people they serve. If anyone remembers the man instead of the meaning, then I failed." She looked at him, the deep lines on his face, the quiet conviction in his tone, and realized she was sitting across from the kind of man whose silence said more than most speeches. Before leaving, she placed an envelope on his table. "We're dedicating a new hall at the academy," she said. "We'd like to name the entrance after you, the Cole Archway. It's where every cadet passes on their first and last day. No plaque, no statue, just the emblem carved into the stone overhead, and one sentence beneath it, drawn once, carried forever." Marty looked down at the envelope, then back at her. "You don't need my permission," he said softly. "But I'm honored just the same." That night, alone again, he stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, the kind of cool that clears old memories. He could see the faint glow of the academy lights on the horizon. Somewhere out there, new recruits were polishing their boots, tracing the same emblem he'd once drawn in the corner of a napkin. He whispered to himself, "Keep it steady. Keep it true." And in that moment, he realized he didn't design a symbol at all. He designed a bridge, from past to present, from silence to legacy, built on the idea that honor, when drawn right, never fades. The dedication day arrived with the kind of dawn that feels rehearsed. Clear sky, crisp air, sunlight that seemed to know where to land. The academy's courtyard buzzed with quiet energy as recruits, officers, and townsfolk gathered beneath the new archway. The stone shimmered faintly where it had been freshly polished, and above the entryway the emblem stood carved in perfect symmetry. The same geometry Marty had once drawn in a diner 50 years earlier. Only now it wasn't ink, it was legacy. Marty walked slowly toward the stage, cane in one hand, sketchbook in the other. He hated ceremonies, but this one wasn't about him, not really. It was about a language made of lines, and the people who'd learned to read it. Sergeant Navarro met him halfway, dressed in full uniform, her posture perfect, her smile warm. "You made it," she said. Wouldn't miss it, Marty replied. You think I'd trust anyone else to check the spacing on that carving? She laughed. You're the only man I know who treats stone like paper. As the crowd settled, Captain Reed took the podium. This archway isn't a monument, he said. It's a passage, one that every cadet will walk through twice, once as a student and once as a servant. And above them, the mark of what we stand for, drawn by a man who never asked for credit, only clarity. Applause rippled through the courtyard, but Marty's eyes were on the recruits lined up behind the captain. Their uniforms were immaculate, their boots shining, their shoulders squared. Yet what struck him most wasn't precision, it was reverence. They didn't look proud, they looked ready. Reed gestured toward Marty. Mr. Cole, would you say a few words? He froze for a moment. Public speaking had never been his craft, but something inside him, maybe the same impulse that had made him pick up a pencil all those years ago, told him to stand. He stepped to the microphone, the paper in his hand trembling slightly, though he hadn't written a speech. When I was young, he began, his voice low but steady, I thought symbols were decorations, things you put on walls or uniforms to look official. But I learned different. A symbol is a promise, one you wear close so you don't forget who you're trying to be. He looked out over the recruits. I drew this emblem after watching men hold the line not because they wanted glory, but because someone had to. Every line here means something. The laurel isn't for victory, it's for endurance. The shield isn't for power, it's for protection. And the star? He paused, letting silence carry the weight. The star isn't about shining, it's about guiding, even in the dark. You could hear a pin drop. The recruits stood taller. The veterans nodded slowly, eyes wet but steady. Marty continued, softer now. If this mark means anything, let it remind you to be decent when no one's keeping score, to hold your post not for medals, but because someone behind you depends on it. That's all honor really is, the shape we give to responsibility. When he stepped back, Reed offered a firm handshake that turned into an embrace. The crowd applauded. Not loud, but long. It wasn't celebration. It was respect given form. As Marty turned to leave the stage, he looked once more at the archway. The sunlight caught the emblem just right, filling the carved star with a quiet golden glow. For the briefest moment, he thought it looked like it was breathing. And though he didn't say it aloud, the thought came clear as a line drawn in perfect ink. If honor has a home, it's in the hands that still believe in it. The following spring, the archway had already become part of the academy's rhythm. Recruits passed beneath it every morning without fanfare, saluting the emblem like it was air they breathed. Marty liked that. Real respect, he thought, doesn't shout. It endures quietly like a song you don't realize you've been humming your whole life. He still visited now and then, usually early before classes began. The campus felt different at dawn, less parade ground, more chapel. The stone of the archway was cool to the touch, and the carved star caught the morning light exactly the way he'd imagined it would. Every time he stood there, he whispered the same 3 words, steadfast, witness, return, his silent benediction for those who served. One morning, he noticed a small change. Beneath the emblem, someone had placed a brass plaque. Not a dedication, not a biography, just a line of text etched in the same careful geometry he'd once drawn by hand. In every design worth keeping, someone's heart is hidden in the lines. He didn't ask who put it there. He didn't need to. Whoever had done it understood. Later that day, Sergeant Navarro found him sketching near the edge of the training field. You've become something of a legend around here, she said, sitting beside him. The cadets call you the line keeper. Marty chuckled. Sounds dramatic. They mean it kindly, she said. You gave them something to measure themselves by. He looked at his trembling hands, the pencil moving slower than it used to. I didn't give them anything. I just drew what they already were, what they could be. Navarro smiled. Maybe that's what real leadership is, reminding people what they already carry. He nodded, thoughtful. Maybe so. They sat in comfortable silence. Beyond the field, a new class marched in formation, their boots striking in perfect rhythm. As they passed the archway, each one glanced up for half a second, not as an order, but as instinct. That was when Marty knew his work had done its job. The design no longer belonged to him. It belonged to them, and to everyone who'd ever needed a reason to stand straight when life tried to bend them. When the day ended and the sun dipped low, Marty gathered his sketchbook and stood beneath the arch one last time. "You're in good hands now," he murmured to the stone, patting it like an old friend. And as he walked away, the wind moved through the courtyard, soft, deliberate, almost like a salute. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The emblem was no longer just carved in stone. It was carried forward in every heartbeat that passed beneath it. In the years that followed, Marty Cole's name never made headlines, and that suited him just fine. His sketchbook ended up in a small display case inside the Academy's lobby, open to the page where the first version of the emblem was drawn in pencil, still smudged with fingerprints. Recruits often stopped to look at it not because it was art, but because it was honest. It wasn't flawless. You could see the hesitation in some of the lines, the small corrections, the quiet proof that perfection was never the goal. Purpose was. Marty's health declined gradually, but his visits to the archway never stopped. Even when the walk grew slower, even when the air caught in his chest, he came. Sometimes he'd just stand beneath the emblem and listen to the sound of boots striking pavement, the living heartbeat of a promise he'd once drawn by hand. When he finally passed, the Academy didn't hold a grand ceremony. They didn't need to. The morning after, the cadets lined up at dawn, each one touching the emblem as they walked beneath it. Not as a farewell, as a continuation. Captain Reed said it best that day. Some people serve by leading, some by fighting, and a rare few by reminding the rest of us what we're supposed to be standing for. The emblem never changed after that. It didn't need to. Its meaning had already expanded beyond geometry and thread. It had become a language, one that said in silence, "Honor isn't something you wear. It's something you keep drawing, every day, in how you live." And if you ever walk beneath that archway when the sun hits the stone just right, you'll see it. That quiet shimmer of gold, breathing like memory, whispering the story of the man who turned a sketch into a legacy.